Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look back at the time when the election result was announced by a Great Lakes steamship. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to take us back nearly 130 years ago is reporter Jimmy Lovren. Jimmy, welcome back.
Thank you. It is good to be here.
Now for your, I don't know if this was planned on your part, second story, kind of election related in history. Is that intentional with, the fact that the election was just over a week ago, about 2 weeks ago, by the time this fully drops?
Election related, but this is my second McKinley related one.
Well, maybe you had the Gus Hall one.
Oh, true. Yeah, no, I guess it's the 'tis the season, I suppose, but yeah, that's not unintentional to kind of time them with the election.
But that's a good point. So this is our second election related. A few episodes ago was Gus Hall, a communist, ran from our area for president multiple times. Check out that episode. And now I guess to your point, also a second McKinley related episode, a little bigger gap in those
14 months
episodes.
ago, we wrote about the world's first monument to the slain President McKinley is in Tower, Minnesota. If you ever are wondering what the obelisk is, next to Benchwarmers Bar as you drive into Tower from 169, it is the first monument to assassinated President McKinley. So why we have already touched back and done another Northlandia on McKinley, I think it's just coincidence.
Yeah, now that we're moving from, not to be too bleak here, from a story about a monument commemorating the abrupt end of his presidency. Now we go to the beginning of his presidency, of it being announced via a Great Lakes steamship. So before we get into how you found out about this, let's just set the scene for what exactly we're talking about here. What happened on the Great Lakes in, 1896?
1896, that's right. So there were two steamships, passenger vessels owned by James J. Hill's Northern Steamship Company. He's the railroad magnate of the time. And anyway, there were two of those, and the St. Paul Dispatch took the whistle off of the Northwest. It was the Northwest and the Northland. Those were the two ships. They took the whistle off the Northwest, brought it down to St. Paul and put it on the roof. Well, they tried the roof of their building, but I guess the steam wasn't powerful enough on their building, and so they put it on the roof of the Twin City Rapid Transit Company's steam-powered electric plant on Hill Street in St. Paul, and that was enough steam to get it to really roar. And anyway, they used that on election night, 1896, to signal who was ahead as election results came in. The Dispatch was a McKinley paper. That's who they favored. And so if the results were favoring him, they would do a, quote, succession of sharp, short toots if returns favor McKinley, and a long, dismal wail if returns favor Bryan. And that was William Jennings Bryan, the Democrat, and who they opposed. So it'd be a happy sound if it was their guy, and long dismal wail if it wasn't. And then they would do once a winner was known, they would do a prolonged version of those calls. And that was according to an advertisement that was in the Dispatch announcing their election night plans. They also showed projected election results onto their building or near their building, to show people kind of in the street, which was very common and what was done actually in Duluth for many years as well. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. Maybe not happening here in Duluth, but obviously came from Duluth. The Northwest was laid up for winter in Duluth, and so its whistle was relatively accessible, about the size of a man is what the newspaper articles said at the time, and it had a range of 15 miles. So yeah, if you tried to, this year it was easy enough to, if you didn't want to watch the election, turn out the TV or silence your phone. You don't have to see each state getting called. I don't think you could have really avoided it back then. If you were within 15 miles of St. Paul, you're probably going to hear it. I don't know what the weather was like that night, but I'd imagine that was pretty loud. So
imagine though how loud it was if you're like close to the source of the building.
I know.
It's got to be. You really aren't ignoring it at that point.
Right. Yeah, and I suppose it's it was on a ship with passengers, and so it had to be bearable, I suppose.
I guess
but
so.
15 miles is a big range. So there's no getting around or muting that. And again, this is a time before radio and obviously television, and so unless you waited for not everyone had telegrams. This is before phones, right? I mean, like, or at least widespread adoption. And so what would kind of happen is unless you wanted to wait for, the paper in the morning to get kind of whatever the details were at the time that it was printed, the only other method would be if someone had a telegram and they were getting results through the telegram, they would then figure out a way to broadcast it to their audience. And so sometimes like there would be plays or musicals or shows at a theater the night of election, and then they would kind of stop it and someone would come out and give an update and then get back to the show. Or there'd be, people in offices with telegrams that would make themselves available. But I mean, newspapers had telegrams, right? The wires. We still call things we get, the wire service. So newspapers kind of took it upon themselves to publicly show broadcast results, usually by some sort of projector near their building. But the Dispatch used the horn, and then the St. Paul Pioneer Press also, it was a separate paper at the time, and they did, I guess, a series of lights, like a different arrangement or colors or something of lights to indicate who at the time was winning. So yeah, you had to get creative because if you wanted instant results, because it wasn't as easy as going on to a map of the country and seeing votes roll in real time almost as results are tallied. So unique workarounds.
Yeah, very different than modern era, election. That you can literally you can make a setting on your phone so that your home screen was showing the results in real time.
Yep.
Is that the wise move? The first election anxiety? Who's to say?
Right. At least you can turn it off. You cannot turn off a steamship whistle if you're within 15 miles
No,
of
you
it.
can't. You really can't. So now you've set the scene for what this is. How did you find out about this? Because this is not a new development.
No. And it was on a podcast, which is also a radio show by WNYC called On the Media. And it's, they cover generally journalism stuff. And this was ahead of the election. I think I listened to it on election day. And because we worked at night, and so I was listening to stuff and not working in the morning. And I listened to it and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. They said, St. Paul Pioneer Press, St. Paul's Dispatch used a Great Lakes steamship, whistle to announce their results. Happy for McKinley, their guy, and sad for Brian. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then we were in here waiting for results, and our crime reporter, Tom Olson, mentioned it that he had heard the same thing. And so I was like, oh, cool. And so we got to talking about it, and I had a Northlandia coming up that was due, and I was like, that would be kind of, if I'm kind of fascinated by it. Obviously, Tom mentioned it as well. He must be interested in it. I bet there'd be a little bit of interest on our readers that one of our beloved ships were borrowed for this, even though it wasn't in our area. It's still, people love when things are from here. So that's kind of how I found out about it. And I did a little research into it, and I tried to figure out if we had ever done something like that. We did not. We just stuck to projecting results for actually several decades. We were doing that, including that night in 1896. But so apparently it never really caught on. We never adopted it, but and from what I can tell, I think the Dispatch just did it that year. So, but yeah, no, I thought it was interesting in a unique way of letting everyone know what the returns were as they were coming in.
Mm-hmm. I'm surprised they never played around with like doing something with like the aerial lift bridge or something like that. Obviously the DNT doesn't control the aerial lift bridge, but the city of Duluth, I'm surprised they haven't done something fun like that at any point in the history of the city and that bridge or something of that nature. I mean, it seems like, I don't know. It's interesting that the cities would try it before we would try it.
I want to say, I think the either, Empire State Building or 30 Rock, 30 Rock is the building where NBC is based out of in New York. And they, one of those buildings for one of the elections would light up for the Electoral College. Like, I don't know if it was somehow, I remember it now, and this was only, the last, several election cycles. Maybe they still did it this year. I don't know. But they would light up the building depending on what the Electoral College returns were. I don't know if it was a graph. I don't know if it was whatever it was. But so some of these similar things happen elsewhere still, even though people are not in New York of all places are not going to be, looking out and trying to see the building to figure out what the results are. There are many ways of knowing live up-to-date results, but it's still kind of a cool thing. So I don't know if, I suppose that could be something in the future about why you get on that. In 4 years, you can light up the bridge. One side is red, one side is blue, and you can kind of like light it up depending on how many electoral votes have been tallied.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's just interesting. Like, why did a paper in St. Paul use this whistle instead of a paper close to the Great Lakes? Like, why did the D&T or something make use of this before the cities?
Yep. And so September, like less than 2 months before the election day, a bunch of the newspaper editors in the state went onto the Northland, right? So the Northwest and Northland were sister ships, and they went on a voyage with James J. Hill, who at that point was a staunch McKinley supporter. So he invited all the editors onto this trip. It was supposed to be on the Northwest. The Northwest broke down. This trip was only delayed by a little bit, but James J. Hill was able to get the Northland ready for them. And so 200 of them, I guess it was 140 editors, and then they're often have wives. They're mostly men, but then they would bring a partner or something. And so there are 200 people total, and they went and sailed to like Mackinac Island. So through the Sulaks and back. James J. Hill was there for the first half of the trip. He had to get back to St. Paul, so I guess he got off at either Mackinac Island or the Sulaks and took a train back to St. Paul. But they almost certainly discussed on the boat, James J. Hill's thoughts on the election, right? He had been campaigning very hard for McKinley. I guess he had been a Democrat previously, but by that point was a Republican and was staunchly pro-McKinley, as was the St. Paul Dispatch. So assuming someone got the idea on that boat, because they would almost have certainly, heard it when they were going through the Sulaks. It was very foggy. There's a article in the fall 1992 edition of the Ramsey County History, which is a publication put out by the Ramsey County Historical Society, that said that they almost certainly passed through some fog. I guess they had actually left Duluth into a strong northeastern storm. But and so and we have coverage of that editor's trip in both the Duluth Herald and Duluth News Tribune archives as well. So and then there was another trip a year before. So that is kind of the thought, is that the idea was formed on that trip or the trip before it, a year before it, because they had heard the whistle and were probably talking elections, and that's probably where the idea was planted. I think that's a pretty plausible idea. And obviously James J. Hill, he's a St. Paul guy. I mean, he his mansion is up by the cathedral there, and so just kind of connected that way.
Mm-hmm. And I guess my follow-up question to that then is, did they ever do this again? Or anything remotely similar to this that we're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I could not find anything about that. If this was ever done again, I don't have the archives of the Dispatcher Pioneer. But from what I could tell, from what I could see in the in our archives and in the Minnesota Historical Societies, what they've digitized for newspapers, which includes like the St. Paul Globe, so just another St. Paul paper or whatever. And newspapers.com has Minneapolis papers, and through all of that, I couldn't find another instance. Doesn't mean it didn't happen or some variation elsewhere didn't happen. There may have been at the same time in Minneapolis. They may have done it off their. They may have had a whistle and done something the same night. It's really unclear because they may have just been referring to the whistle in St. Paul in some of their. The Minneapolis Tribune may have been referring to this whistle that people were going to be able to hear, and it may have been the one in St. Paul. Or it was one in Minneapolis, a separate one. That's unclear. So maybe it happened the same night, or they were just referring to this one we've been talking about. That part was unclear. But from what I can tell, in Minnesota, this didn't happen again. In Duluth, it was always projected, at least until radio really became a thing. Our archives drop off at 1920-ish, I believe. And so 4 years ago, I wrote an article looking back at the election of 1920, and that was like a party in town. And the D&T was then located where we had been for up until about this time last year, corner of First Street, West First Street and Fifth Avenue West. And that was, they projected the results, and There were parties all around town. In 1896, St. Paul's doing this whistle thing down there. The News Tribune, which I guess had an office in the Lonsdale building, projected the results onto the side of the American Exchange Bank building at 230 West Superior Street. That's where the Wells Fargo building now stands, and across the avenue, Lonsdale building still stands. And they projected their results on a big 24 by 24 foot canvas. And that would be something that they kind of did for decades, at least until 1920. I'm guessing beyond, but that's kind of where our archives drop off. So yeah, it kind of when radio, took off, maybe that's how people preferred to get their results. But until then, it was, you'd go to a show or a late night party or something where someone would have access either to a telegram or someone with access to a telegram would feed them results, and they'd interrupt the show and say, hey, returns from wherever come in favor of McKinley or something like that, or it's thrown on the side of a building. So yeah, kind of a unique way of finding out results live when TV, radio, those internet obviously didn't exist.
Mm-hmm. It'd be a memorable one. I imagine there'd be some pushback to it if they did it today, just because of noise and stuff. And it's just probably not the most efficient way to get results out there, given how easy it is now to access information. But it's an interesting look back at how they would have done it back then. There's different creative ways to accomplish that. Right.
No, it would have. I guess by 1920, the News Tribune was kind of putting movies and other cartoons and stuff on in between election results. So it was, kind of an interesting, I guess you weren't just looking at a board all the time, but yeah, that was kind of a...
Well, they're brave in the cold to do that, Right. Like, there better be something more than just a static, hey, look, election numbers or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, so I guess there were huge throng swarms points of vantage to see election results. Thousands of Duluthians lined Superior Street. And that was in 1920, so it was popular, I guess, yeah.
Was it in 96, though? Who's to say?
That I couldn't tell. I don't know how big the crowd was. I found kind of coverage announcing that they were going to be doing that, but I could not see where, how it went, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think there was anything kind of the next day saying, whatever. It wasn't some big. I don't think it was as big. So
no, well, it's hard to even picture. Now I'm thinking about it, like what Duluth say in 1896 versus 1920. Mm-hmm. We completely different. That was like pre the big fire of 1918 and stuff. Like it hadn't burned to the ground yet and been rebuilt and such. And it's just weird to even think about how it would even have been back in 96 compared to... Yeah, no,
I think Duluth was a very different city, those 24 years, fire of 1918 being something that shaped it. But this was still at a time when Duluth, could have, there's always that talk that Duluth could have been a major, could be the Chicago, whatever.
Yeah.
And in a headline somewhere around, I didn't jot it down, but somewhere around 1896, I think, is a headline that was in one of the papers, and now I've got it here. Okay, so it was in the August 5th, 1896, either the Herald or the News Tribune, and the headline is Duluth, the New City, the Future Great City of the Universe. Which city of the universe? You hear about like world cities or something like that, or cosmopolitan, whatever, but the city of the universe to me was striking. So there was hope that that's what Duluth would be.
And now we're a climate refuge,
I guess.
Allegedly. All right, Gene. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. It's great talking about election stuff. I think everyone's ready to move on from elections.
I will find a non-election story for you in 6 weeks.
Sounds good. But thanks so much for joining, Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you, Wyatt.
And thank you for joining us in this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topics/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to the Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss around the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.